Hello, Bio20. Welcome to the video on taxonomy. Today, our goals are learning how to name organisms through a classification system. How do you know you are doing this well or doing it right? Is that A, you can name all 8 levels. You can name the different parts of the domain, the different parts of the kingdoms, as well as explaining to me what binomial nomenclature is. So let's get started. So here is what we are talking about, animal classification, taking animals and using their scientific names so that across the planet, we can talk about the same animals. I'm going to link this video, this song, into our actual thing as it is a great listen. So classifying and naming organisms, we're not into our notes yet. We'll wait till the next page, but I just want to give you some general information. This is a knowledge and practice developed for everyone in the world scientifically to help us communicate animals' names. Okay, so in order for this to occur, we had to design a universal way to identify and classify. When we identify and classify using a scientific name, we call this taxonomy, the practice of classifying living things. So you can see along the side there, I have a generalized version of it: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So if we're looking there, that is something that we would call usually a leopard. Now we have common names for animals: leopards, polar bear, a German shepherd, but that's not their scientific name. When we are looking at their scientific name, we are taking actually their genus and their species and combining it. But before we do that, we have to look at them as an organism and build our way down. So when we look at it, we know that this is an animal. We're going to learn about the 6 different kingdoms, and we know that this animal falls in Animalia. When we look at the phylum, we know it has a backbone, so we're going to call it Chordata. Class is now, where does it fall under the vertebrate animals? Well, it falls under Mammalia. It gives birth to live babies. The order is Carnivora. It eats meat. The family is Felidae. Felidae being cats. Okay. Then the genus, getting very more specific, is Panthera. And then we name it Panthera pardus because there are more than one type of leopard. So in your notes, we are going to fill out these parts here: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. We are going to do an example of a bobcat classification in the 3rd box, but in the middle it says that there is a mnemonic device. Mnemonic just means ways to remember, how to remember the order. So in the center, beside domain, you are going to write did. So when you have domain in your one part of your chart, you're going to write did in this middle part of the chart. Kingdom is meant for king. Phylum is Philip. Class is come, C-O-M-E. Order is over. Family is for. Genus is good. And species is spaghetti. So your mnemonic device to help you remember the order is did King Philip come over for good spaghetti? Every letter of that mnemonic device at the beginning matches what the group is. So domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So your chart has now the group, the mnemonic device, and now let's do the example. So the example comes down to the bobcat classification. Domains are very, 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 very large. And we're going to talk about what those mean here shortly. But essentially, we're going to go into the domain of eukarya. Eukarya means pretty much everything on this planet almost, so it's a really broad category. Kingdom now brings it down into the world of Animalia, meaning we're getting rid of the idea of mushrooms, trees, euglena, which are little-celled organisms. We're saying, no, the thing we're trying to classify is an animal. But again, if you look at the organisms that are included in that group, it's still a very large variety. So now we want to say, well, the phylum is Chordata, meaning it has some sort of backbone. So it eliminates earthworms, starfish, and bees. Okay, so things without a backbone. Now we're getting into the mammalia, which is essentially animals that give birth to live babies, have hair, and all those things. So a mammal. So we can eliminate a shark and a frog off of our list because those things do not one does give birth to live babies, shark, but it doesn't have all the classifications of a mammal. A carnivore is one that eats meat. So you can see we lose the horse on our list. Felidae means cat. So anything above that on the list that is not a cat will be dropped. So for example, a dog. Now we're getting really specific. We're saying the genus is lynx. So house cat doesn't fall under lynx. Cougar doesn't fall under lynx. They're a different genus. And then because there is a lynx and a bobcat within that genus, we need to be very specific and say the species of bobcat or rufous. So we can see that our classification follows that idea. So again, your notes have all the groups, your mnemonic device, and then the third one is this part right here. Now you'll notice at the very bottom, genus and species is italicized, meaning they're kind of in slanted lettering. And that is because this is called binomial nomenclature. And that's actually when you are looking at a species and trying to figure out what it is. If it's listed on a scientific study or on a plaque somewhere, if you're looking at something, it'll have Lynx rufus as its binomial nomenclature name. So again, I'm going to link this video in. It just talks about the classification and shows what I just talked about in a better video so you can kind of see the manipulation of things. So let's talk about domains. Domains are huge. They include just everything living in this world. So you can see that there are 3 large domains. We're going to talk about the differences between these domains. We have bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Now, if we go back to the slide before, you'll notice that archaea and eukaryotes are there, and bacteria known as cyanobacteria. But you can see that the names are all the same. So what we want to do here is talk about the differences and similarities. So bacteria are what we call prokaryotic and unicellular. So prokaryotes are different than eukaryotes. They lack membrane-bound nucleuses. They reproduce asexually. And they're most times autotrophs through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. And they move something called a flagella, which is essentially a tail that like flips, like a little motor. Archaea is also a prokaryotic unicellular organism that lacks a membrane-bound nucleus. It also reproduces asexually, and it's an autotroph that goes through chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis is making energy in the ocean. Eukaryotes are multicellular with membrane-bound nucleuses. So that's really what separates us from the other 2 categories, is that our nucleus is membrane-bound. It's located inside a membrane. We tend to reproduce sexually, and we usually have very large nutritional requirements. They're very, very diverse. But traditionally, we take eukaryotes and we place them into 6 kingdoms depending on the method of nutrition or how their food is obtained. For example, all the species in the kingdom Plantae are autotrophs, and all the species in the kingdom Animalia are heterotrophs, meaning autotrophs, they make their own food, heterotrophs, they obtain their food by eating other things. So if we were to look at the system, here is the system. There's a 3-domain system, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Eukarya then has 6 kingdoms underneath it, okay? Well, I should say 4 kingdoms, and then the 2 kingdoms on the side fall under bacteria and archaea. So the 6 kingdoms are bacteria, archaeobacteria, protista, fungi, plantae, or Virida plantae, and animalia. Again, just recognizing these words is what is important. I'm not going to ask you specific questions on these, just understanding 6 kingdoms that break down into even more. So again, I will link this video in so you can kind of see the buildup of how the classification of the 6 kingdoms came. So this is an example of the tree of life. This is kind of what Darwin alluded to. And when Darwin, if you don't know who he is, he's the man that came up with natural selection. He is kind of the big wig that we're going to talk about later on. But essentially when Darwin was trying to come up with this idea of natural selection, he did a lot of sketching and he did a lot of information in his books and stuff. And what he did is he actually sketched a rudimentary sketch of this, like a very simplified sketch of what we call the tree of life. And then beside it wrote, I think, question mark. So he was onto something massive and something huge, but he didn't even know it. He had to be like, maybe this is right. I don't know. So it's kind of cool. But what you can see from here, guys, is that we have a common ancestor at the very bottom, and then we're going to see some branching. Branches of bacteria, branches of archaea, and then eukaryotes and through the animals. So now we're going to jump down to species. So when we are naming in taxonomy, it's really important to understand that really what we are getting at is what is the genus and the species of the animal. So species are further organized into their genus based on morphological structures, meaning structures on them that are similar. So for example, ostriches are part of the Struthio genus, okay? In which all the species in that genus all have two toes instead of three or four like most birds. So if you looked up two-toed birds, the ostrich would be there, but there may be one or two other species of birds that fall under the genus of Struthio. Any birds that have three toes will have a different genus, and any birds that have four toes will have a different genus. When we combine it, we kind of come up with this idea of binomial nomenclature. And Linnaeus, a famous scientist, kind of did this, and he had a big hand in it, and he used either Latin or Greek for the final parts of the naming. So the first part of the name is always the genus to tell us kind of the broader category it's in. And then the second part is very specific to that species. So for example, Homo sapiens is not one word. The first word is Homo, meaning the larger genus, sapiens being the species. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is taxonomy. We're going to learn how taxonomy can be used in this world of dichotomous keys next day. I hope you guys have a great day.